that one glorious word represents more than just the geography between the Sabine and the Rio Grande. It represents a unique idea and way of life. A life of rugged individualism, proud self-reliance, gritty toughness, and fierce independence. That is what made Texas, and that is what will save her again. Howdy, folks. Sam Houston here. I want to thank you for tuning into the Feed Bandit podcast. Feed Bandit is the Texas first outdoors brand built by rabid Texans, for rabid Texans, and all those who aim to be one someday. We unapologetically promote the ideals that shape our Texas pride and Texas first patriotism through our love of hunting, the outdoors, and the gear and apparel we create. Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Check us out at feedbandit.com. And to repeat that great rallying cry from a former colleague of mine, liberty or death. Now, enough of my talking. Here are a couple of bandits that love Texas as much as I do. Enjoy.
Howdy, friend. Welcome back to the Feed Bandit podcast. Jimmy back with you. And on this one, I wanted to do another Leave the Swamp episode, but I wanted to take a slightly different angle with it because of an article I ran across in my kind of daily reading, online reading regimen. And it really does kind of center around this whole kind of industry of hunting outdoors and whatnot. And of course, with all of us, I'm sure you, if you're a hunter, are probably a meat eater. The Corn Bandit and I are very much meat eaters. We love our beef. We love our game. We love our birds and all that type of stuff. And this one centers around what's going on in the beef market. And I have some opinions on here that might be a little thought-provoking, I think, if you hear me out and we go through this article. But what it ends up doing is kind of centers us back down into looking at why is it that here in Texas, where we have really plentiful beef herds and could have significantly more beef herds to feed not only all the people here in Texas, but I mean elsewhere. We should be exporting a ton, pun intended, beef, easily feeding everyone here within our great state. What is it that holds us back from that? And of course, if you're familiar with the theme on this Leave the Swamp series, everything comes back to Mordor and D.C., holding back the state of Texas. Washington, D.C. puts into place idiotic regulations that really harm us here in Texas. And we are long past the time of trying to rethink that relationship. We need to rethink that relationship. So I ran across this article on the website Zero Hedge, which is a website I go to quite frequently to see what's going on in the world. I recommend you do it as well. Don't agree with everything on there, but at least it gives you kind of I don't know if I'd even say a neutral slant on things, but it gives you a different kind of introduction into what's going on in the world that at least maybe you can think for yourself a little more than swallowing, the slop that's on mainstream news and whatnot. Well, this article's called The Soaring Price of Beef, and it was written by Jeffrey Tucker. Now, Jeffrey Tucker, I've been reading for over probably 20 years. He is a libertarian writer. You'll probably say anarcho-capitalist, meaning someone who's very much understands human nature, human action, and basic economics, and goes to show why, essentially whenever a government intervenes in any kind of market, it screws things up. And when the highest government in the land intervenes and imposes top-down, one-size-fits-all regulations, it tends to screw things up a lot more than it ever would be, even on a state-to-state level. So I just want to read through this article, And it kind of goes also to something that at some point I want Feed Bandit to really get involved in. Corn Bandit is, and I'll get into that as we go, but I'd love to have at some point, Feed Bandit beef or something, But let's go through this. And it starts off, you've doubtless seen the price of beef at the store. It is shocking, outrageous really, ticking up higher and higher each week. When all this began 4 years ago, many people assumed that the prices would settle back down after the crisis ended. That has not happened. The problem is getting worse, not better. Now, I will say here real quick, of course, higher prices are helping, I would imagine, cattlemen, assuming the input prices are not rising as fast or more than the final price. And hopefully in the long run, what will happen is these higher prices will entice more people to raise beef and bring down prices to, an equilibrium level. But I think as we'll see, because the market is so manipulated in a bad way by the feds, it just screws everything up. Continuing, checking in on the CPI for ground beef, we were shocked to see double-digit rates of inflation. The price of beef steaks in 5 years has gone up fully 50% and keeps rising. That's crazy. Right now, the beef inflation rate is running at an astonishing 12.4%. The price of ground beef has doubled in 10 years. It's nuts. This isn't just government data. Industry sources are showing beef prices running far ahead of other groceries. This is happening just as more science is showing how essential beef is for human health. And right here, I want to stop and I've done a lot of research on this through reading and watching videos or whatever to try to figure out, what is going on with our health and whatnot. And I totally agree with this statement in that if you look at it in the United States, why do we have such an obesity kind of epidemic here? And hey, don't get me wrong, I'm not the skinniest one on the shelf. All you got to do is go look at our camp polos on feedbandit.com, and you can see me modeling them, and you can see my gut and my handlebars and all that type of stuff. And you know what? I'm getting close to the conclusion here that obviously the food supply in the United States is utterly corrupted. And the things that we eat, the processed foods, the things that have all the vegetable oils and all these, these processed oils and whatnot, are the things that are keeping us really fat, making us eat more because they don't give us any nourishment and all this type of thing. And I've kind of done this little experiment over the last, call it 6 months or so, where I've tried to eat as much red meat as possible, as much fatty meat as possible. And the funny thing about it is whenever I do that, and I'm also cutting out as much processed food, carbs, and things of this nature as possible. Now, don't get me wrong, I probably still drink too much beer and whatnot still. So it's kind of 3 steps forward, 1 step back, or 2 steps back. But just by eating fatty meat and beef and things of this nature, I feel better. I feel significantly better. I get full. I hit a wall and then I get full after not eating nearly as much total volume as I would if I was eating processed meat or processed foods and all that type of stuff, restaurant foods and all this crap cooked in these oils and whatever else, and so anecdotally and personally, it does seem like beef, as an example, is the essential food, and other game and wild animals and things like that. Because, as humans, we're carnivores. And I'm starting to wonder if we actually are even omnivores. Like, should we even be eating plants? That's a whole nother discussion. But, for sure we are carnivores at the very base. At least that's the conclusion that I'm coming to. So this kind of hits this whole idea of the beef supply and prices going up and everything. It really hits home because, in my thinking, if that's the case, then it should be probably, I don't want to say it should be dirt cheap, but it should be a lot cheaper than it is in the sense that there'd be more supply, So that's just kind of where we're going here. So let me continue in this article and we'll see what happens. It's not the only good meat, but it contains most of what we need for health, weight control, energy, building muscle, and organ strength. There's growing demand for everything from ground beef to steaks. The growing demand is coinciding with a 50-year decline in size of herds. Feedlot reports, quote, the USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service released its cattle report on January 31st. The total of all cattle and calves on January 1st, 2025 was estimated at 86.6 million head, about 500,000 fewer than the previous year. This marks the 6th year of contraction for aggregate beef and dairy cattle inventories and the 11th year overall of the current cattle cycle, the cyclical expansion and contraction of the national cattle herd over time. The cycle is influenced by the combined effects of cattle prices, input prices that drive cow-calf producer profitability, the gestation period for cattle, the time needed for raising calves to market weight, and climate conditions. End quote. So this could become a huge problem for the Trump administration. If inflation and food prices, and beef in particular, keep going like this, there's a genuine risk to the presidency and the entire Republican Party. People who are not actually very political tend to judge the party in power by how much they have to spend at the grocery store. If they find themselves switching from beef to rice and beans, they will blame the ruling party regardless. So far, it does not appear to be a priority with Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins to address this huge problem with anything more than the status quo. This has to change. And I wonder if that's the case, because the grain donors, the grain industry and that type of thing, I believe is probably exponentially more a larger contributor to politicians than the beef industry. That would be my hunch. I would suggest a 3-point agenda for the Trump administration. It needs to be enacted immediately to keep this problem from spinning out of control. First, there needs to be an emergency declaration of any existing barriers that keep farmers and other middle sources from getting products to the stores. Emergency deregulation of any. So 2 main regulatory bodies deal with this problem. The USDA, Food Safety and Inspection Service, and the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. Vast paperwork and technology required just to track the source, and every state has rules on storage and more. It's a system worthy of Soviet-style central planning. All these are clogging up supply chains, such that many bureaucrats are intervening at every stage. See what I mean? It's the government gets in the way of everything. It makes problems worse. So they're saying, we got to have all this to protect people from bad meat and this, that, and the other. Yeah, but you're starving people at the same time, and you're putting out of business folks that could be bringing food to the market at the same time. And remember, it's in a producer and seller's interest to not kill its customers. I mean, that's just a basic law of economics. So the market will regulate much better, obviously, as we can see here, than the government, because the government is creating a bigger problem than what it's actually trying to solve. So it says, all these regulations consolidate the industry into only the largest players who know the ropes and can navigate the bureaucracies. All these rules need to be relaxed so the sellers can work directly with wholesalers to assure safe and good products. Fixing this problem could even require a fast executive order backed by legislation. And see, regulation, it always tends to consolidate industries, creating gigantic conglomerates and corporations that control an industry, and then it's in that giant conglomeration's interests to then control the politicians through massive donations and whatnot to continue the regulations that keep them in power and keep out of power or keep out of business the smaller folks. That's just how it works in any industry. Second, there must be a focus on the problem of the USDA's strict monopoly on processing meat. This adds dramatically to time and expense, and pointlessly so. Farmers must have the absolute right to be on-site processing followed by sales of all sorts. The entire USDA system must be crushed and competition in meat processing permitted. The monopoly must end. Proving my point right there, just again. Creating monopolies that destroy the industry. For the little guy. The PRIME Act needs a quick passage. It stands for Processing, Revival, and Intrastate Meat Exemption Act. This act would allow states to permit the intrastate sale, or within state borders, of custom slaughtered meat, such as beef, pork, or lamb, and from these facilities to customers, restaurants, grocery stores, hotels, and other food service outlets. Meat would no longer require full federal USDA inspection for intrastate transactions. This would allow genuine farm-to-table meat, vastly reduce costs, and immediately increase supply on the shelves. In addition, this would reduce the costs of slaughter and incentivize a bolstering of herds, relaxing existing price pressure. So there you have it right there. Take a step back. The USDA is preventing folks in Texas from processing and directly supplying straight from their processing to, consumers, restaurants, grocery stores, hotels, and such. That right there should be making you question right now, why in Texas are we allowing Mordor DC to tell us that we can't do that? Who are they to be? Who do they think they are that they can actually tell us what to do here? Why should they be able to tell us what to do here? It's probably the better question. Why should Washington, D.C. have the power or have the ability, or why do we give it the ability to tell us what to do about our own food here in Texas? Why? It's ridiculous. Set aside the fact that if you go and read the U.S. Constitution, it does not grant, nowhere in there does it grant the federal government the power to do that. What it does grant is that it can, quote-unquote, regulate interstate commerce. But if you go back and look at what did the word regulate mean in that context when the Constitution was written, what that meant was the federal government's sole power was to keep commerce regular between the states, meaning it would not allow states to erect trade barriers because the states were supposed to have a free trade zone. That's all it meant. That's all it meant. It didn't mean to tell how everything should be done within states or across states, things like that. Everything has been totally upended, done a 180, totally perverted nowadays. This right here should prove to everybody that there's no reason why Texas should listen to this. And if we had any kind of governor or state legislature that had any cojones, they would stand up to this and say, we are nullifying this. We're not going to follow this anymore, and we hereby grant the ability to for processors to sell custom slaughtered meat. There you have it. And hey, Washington, you could come stop us, but I will tell you, I will direct the troopers and encourage county sheriffs to prevent the federal government from doing that. Well, let's see what they do. That's what should happen. But we have politicians here that are owned wholesale by the big industry interests, the big meat processors, and truly, they're just cowards to the federal government that they wouldn't do anything about it. So the third point here is all meat imported from abroad should be exempt from tariffs and quotas that are currently increasing wholesale and retail pricing. So this should be done in the name of saving the American diet and maybe even saving the Trump presidency. I get that Trump believes that tariffs are necessary to protect the U.S. industry. I have other things to say about that. But right now they risk pillaging the U.S. consumer. These tariffs should not apply to meat in a time of crisis. The laws governing meat in this country are ancient, dating even from 1906. They are put into place to help large industry players in a time of grave doubt about the safety and cleanliness of the industry. Contrary to myth, the industry fully supported the regulations because they knew for sure they would consolidate the industry and bolster consumer confidence. Unfortunately, the new rules bogged down the local farmer and added costs. All these many years later, they are still in place but serve no real function. So once again, of course the industry supports this and they will do everything in their power to create as much propaganda against this to preserve their power. But it's hurting you, the little guys, and the local farmers by adding additional costs, additional paperwork, additional regulations, preventing you from doing things that you would otherwise easily be doing, and thereby putting costs through the roof, because supply is limited. The remaining independent beef farmers in this country need the freedom to sell directly to stores and restaurants and to customers. People would absolutely love the chance to buy directly, knowing exactly the farmer and rancher they are supporting. The existing system does not allow this. The Trump administration needs to place an urgent call to the Beef Initiative, founded in 2021 to make food more localized, redundant, and secure. We serve our community by providing market access to producers and consumers who understand the importance of food integrity. That's the Beef Initiative. There are many such organizations and knowledgeable farmers. Joel Salatin of Polyface must be a top consultant to guide the White House. Such efforts are completely consistent with the agenda of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. Currently, prioritizing this is not on the agenda, but it must be. The last thing we need are price controls or an angry public that can no longer afford real beef. No one wants the fake products being pushed by those who favor, quote, lab-grown meat or the, quote, impossible burger. Jesus Christ. How disgusting. And especially when you think about what it has to go through to make a quote-unquote impossible burger. Anyone, if you put that in your mouth, you're courting disaster. Much less the agenda to eat bugs instead of cows, chicken, and pigs. So far, inflation in beef has not been so terrible as to make it forbidding to the average family, but that is changing, and quickly. The Trump administration dealt well with the egg crisis by increasing supply and stopping the hen slaughter. Egg prices are down substantially. The same needs to happen with cows now. And I totally agree. I just want to get back to the point that I made kind of at the beginning of this about how, and that was the end of the article, sorry, about how, looking at just health in general and why fatty beef and fatty meats are so important and healthy for you versus processed food cooked, and with just one crap ingredients, stuff grown with all sorts of pesticides and whatever on it, and all this kind of crap that we're putting in our bodies. It just, try it out. You just feel better when you eat when you eat food that is as close to the hoof or as close to the land as possible, like real land as possible. And you might be thinking, okay, well that means I'm gonna eat, vegetables and fruit and all this stuff. And I say, you can. In the United States, however, it's very hard to find fresh, non-adulterated fruits and vegetables and things of that nature here. I'll just give you a little anecdote. When my family and I, we spent some time in Mexico several years ago, and, we would go down there, we would eat food from restaurants almost the entire time we were there. And it was, true Mexican food and whatnot, and it was really good and whatnot. But the thing about it is we would eat so much of that food down there, and both my wife, Laura, and I, we lost weight the whole time we were there. We were there about 4 months, and we lost weight. If we were to do that here in the United States and eat Texican or something, my God, we'd each gain 100 pounds. Now, the difference is when you're down in Mexico, they're not cooking all their stuff typically in processed vegetable oils and using crap ingredients. They're using fresh ingredients. They're cooking in lard a lot of the times. And number one, it just tastes better. It always tastes better when you're down there. But number two, the ingredients in the food are better. And amazingly enough, like I said, we lost weight when we were down there. We do the same thing here, of course. You know exactly what happened. We would each gain 50 to probably 100 pounds if we did that over 4 months. It's just absolutely nuts, insane. It's because our food supply here has been utterly corrupted, and that corruption has been influenced and allowed to happen by Washington, D.C., through unconstitutional regulations that they put in place, which allows big ag and big business to consolidate because they're the only ones that can actually deal with the regulations. And then through that consolidation, they use the capital they earn to then buy off politicians to get the regulations that they need to stay in place to keep the small guys out of business. So this just goes to show that right now, there's no way to change that system. It is virtually impossible. There's no way to do it. Those powers are way too entrenched. Could it be done on a state level here? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But, I would rather have that fight in Austin amongst people that I live closer to than have that fight in Mordor, trying to fight, the corn lobby out of Iowa and, whatever else, the wheat lobby out of Nebraska to the Dakotas or whatever. It's just, why bother having that fight? Let's just do that. Let's just figure out what we need to do here in Texas. And there's no need anymore to ask permission from Mordor. We just need to say enough is enough. The people of Texas have a right to buy the food that they want directly from whom they want. That's it. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's their responsibility to make sure that the people they're buying from are, doing the right thing. But you know what? That's what freedom is called. Freedom is personal responsibility, pure and simple. Regulations, the USDA and all this crap, sure, it's well-meaning and whatnot, but there's so much evidence throughout the history of man that it never works. Centralized, one-size-fits-all, top-down regulation never works. It just creates more problems. So right here, we see a perfect example of more problems being created through stupid regulation. And like I said at the beginning, I would love for Texas, or for some politicians here, to grow some nuts and just say no. Start saying no to the federal government because it's hurting your people. And this is a perfect example of as good a place to start as any. Just say, nope, the people of Texas, the small folks, they have a right to sell their beef to whatever restaurant they want. Actually, no, I almost said sorry, USDA. No, not sorry, USDA. USDA, you have no jurisdiction here. That's it, period. And then we just move on. Nullify that and move on. That's what needs to happen here. Just another step beyond. I'll just make a quick comment here because this is a much further discussion. But if you're listening to this, and as hunters and whatnot, we love the land. We're great stewards of the land, right? We do what we can wherever we can to take care of the land. We're the greatest environmentalists there are, quite frankly. You know it, and I know it. And what's better for the land than pastures where cattle roam? Or is it monocropping and destroying and depleting the topsoil? I'll leave that question to you, but I'll tell you what, I think I know the answer to that one. So anyway, consider what I've said here. Just take it as another point, another example as to why Texas needs to take on responsibility itself. If it wants to be great again, like we advocate Texas being great again, it needs to start saying no to its abusive spouse in Mordor, and and start taking power back into its own hands. That is its power, and it's not the power of Washington. So anyway, another example of the necessity to leave the swamp right there. So let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your opinion on this matter. Agree, disagree, tell me where I'm nuts, tell me where I'm wildly off, or tell me how I'm wildly right on the dot. Either way, I'd love to hear it. So I will leave you with that one, and join us on the next Feed Bandit podcast. I really appreciate y'all listening. Really appreciate you listening. It means everything to us. Check out go to feedbandit.com. We have a lot of cool hats out there that you'll probably find one you like. We have a lot of cool, we just launched are in the process of launching our polos, which are very unique, Texas and outdoors focused, Texas first outdoors focused. We think you'll like the prints. I think they're really cool and unique. You're not going to see much out there like these, I promise you. Conversation starters. So go out there, check them out. We'd really appreciate it. The swag, your purchase of any swag, of course, helps keep this podcast on the air. So really appreciate it. But with that, y'all take care. And remember, support your local feed store, especially those ones that should be allowed to sell, Rancher Joe's meat right down the road directly to you. That's what should be the case. All right, you take care.
Well, I hope the Bandits gave you an interesting episode that either entertained or educated you. Or better yet, both. Hell, I told them this podcasting thing looks harder to do than defeating Santa Anna. So if you would, please help them out by sharing it with all your like-minded friends to help the Bandits get the word out. And don't forget to check us out at feedbandit.com and grab some gear and apparel to support the cause of Texas. Remember, Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Finally, as I said some time ago on the eve of the great battle, and I vigorously repeat here again, be men, be free men, that your children may bless their father's name. Well, fellow bandit, until next time.